Back to the White House. Joe Biden has been declared president-elect of the United States. He says he's seeking to unify a divided country. But can he undo some of Donald Trump's controversial policies at home and abroad? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. After days of uncertainty and a hard-fought, bitter campaign, Joe Biden has been declared the winner of the U.S. presidential election. He says he wants to restore the soul of America and unite a deeply divided nation. Biden received more votes than any other presidential candidate in history, but he's appealed to the tens of millions of Americans who did not vote for him to give him a chance. After his victory in Pennsylvania, Biden is projected to have a majority of the Electoral College votes needed to win the White House. Here's some of what the president-elect had to say in his victory speech on Saturday night.
It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again, listen to each other again. And to make progress, we have to stop treating our opponents as our enemies. They are not our enemies. They are Americans. They are Americans. The Bible tells us to everything there is a season, a time to build, a time to reap and a time to sow, and a time to heal. This is the time to heal in America.
And apart from bringing a divided nation together, Biden has inherited huge challenges: a battered economy, a devastating coronavirus crisis, and anger about racial inequality. Here's some of what he plans to do when he takes office.
Americans have called upon us to marshal the forces of decency, the forces of fairness, to marshal the forces of science and the forces of hope in the great battles of our time. The battle to control the virus, the battle to build prosperity, the battle to secure your family's health care, the battle to achieve racial justice and root out systemic racism in this country. And the battle to save our planet by getting climate under control.
Kamala Harris is the first black woman of Indian descent to become vice president-elect. Her historic victory has inspired millions of Americans, and she too called for unity during her victory speech.
Our very democracy was on the ballot in this election, with the very soul of America at stake, and the world watching. You ushered in a new day for America. You chose hope and unity, decency, science, and yes, truth. You chose Joe Biden as the next president of the United States of America.
While Biden has struck a conciliatory tone, President Donald Trump has been defiant and even refused to concede. He's also threatened a legal challenge to the vote count. But once Biden becomes president, he'll likely face a divided Congress. Ballots are still being counted, but Democrats are likely to retain control of the House of Representatives, while Republicans could keep their majority in the Senate, making it difficult to advance his policies. Let's have a look at how Biden plans to reshape U.S. foreign policy. He wants to reverse Trump's controversial America First agenda and restore Washington's role on the world stage, and has promised to repair relations with Europe and opposes Brexit. Biden intends to rejoin the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, return to the Paris Climate Accord, and restore U.S. membership in the World Health Organization. He insists he'll take a much harder line on Russia and be tough on China while maintaining cooperation with Beijing on several issues. Biden says he'll only initiate talks with North Korea's leader if he shows a will to abandon his nuclear ambitions. And the president-elect is likely to restore ties with Palestinians and shift U.S. policy on Saudi Arabia. All right, let's bring in our guests in the Moroccan city of Ifrane. Nizar Messari, Associate Professor of International Studies at Al Akhawain University, In Oxford, UK, Thomas Gift, Director of University College London's Centre on US Politics. And joining us in Istanbul, Matthew Bryza, a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and Global Energy Center. Welcome to each of you. Thomas, let me start with you. It's being reported that Joe Biden is planning on quickly signing a series of executive orders once he's sworn in as the next president, and that these orders would see America rejoin the Paris Climate Accords, reverse President Trump's withdrawal from the World Health Organization, end the Muslim ban, reinstate DACA. I'm curious to know from your perspective, how much is Joe Biden going to have to rely on executive orders to try to implement his agenda? And is that something that he wants to do?
Well, I think that executive orders will be the primary mechanism by which Biden will be forced to govern. And that's simply because it's looking increasingly like he will face divided government, with Republicans more likely than not maintaining the Senate. Anytime you have a divided government, the default position is policy paralysis, gridlock. And so increasingly what we've seen from presidents is using the executive order to try to get legislation through. I think that makes it unlikely that we will see any sort of ambitious legislative agenda. That won't come to fruition. But the executive order will mean that policymaking won't totally grind to a halt in the wake of this divided government. So as you said, I expect Biden to use the executive order quite aggressively in areas like the environment, on immigration, and so on.
Nizar, there are foreign policy experts who've said that because of Joe Biden's familiarity with international affairs, because of his past as the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and also as a former vice president, that it's those qualities, it's those things that will work to his advantage in repairing relationships with the international community. Do you agree?
That's certainly an asset for him. It puts him on a different league as many former presidents because he has all that foreign policy expertise. But I think that his priority will be to deal with the domestic with domestic politics, because that's where many of his challenges will be. As we just heard, he will be facing a Senate dominated very likely by Republicans. So he has to show his ability to lead the U.S. And to heal the internal problems that that the U.S. has experienced over the last few years before he can go to foreign affairs. Foreign affairs is usually a second priority for U.S. presidents, and mainly when they start their first government, that's not their highest priority.
Matthew, let me get your take on this question. You heard Nizar there, and he was saying that Joe Biden's going to have to really focus at first on domestic policy. When do you think Joe Biden can start focusing on repairing America's image in the eyes of the international community, of repairing those frayed relationships?
Well, I agree that in general, American presidents do place the domestic agenda as the #1 priority. And for now, clearly, the overwhelming priority for a President Biden will be fighting the pandemic. He's already said that tomorrow or Monday, he's going to announce his task force. It's going to be headed by a former Surgeon General, as well as head of the Food and Drug Administration. And that's going to become an international task by definition, because the pandemic knows no boundaries. So, yeah, I think he's very quickly in the administration going to reconstitute the White House office on a global effort to fight pandemics. And I think then that's going to start this healing process that, yes, he talks about domestically as also a priority, but also it'll begin very early on internationally. I mean, when he returns the United States to the World Health Organization, which I expect him to do in the first few days, that already is going to be sending a signal that the United States wants to act responsibly and wants to help work with other countries to fight serious global problems.
Thomas, you heard Matthew there talk about Joe Biden having expressed, that he wants to start getting the nation on the road to healing. But I'm curious about your perspective on the fact that, Joe Biden's message is one of unity. We all know that. But, you know, we have to remember that whatever Joe Biden's intentions may be as the next president, tens of millions of people voted for Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump expanded the number of votes he got in this election cycle versus 2016. So how difficult is it going to be for Joe Biden to try to bring the country together?
Well, I think very difficult. And repairing federal institutions and restoring trust in the federal government broadly, especially against the backdrop of polarized electorates, will be an uphill battle. Biden has promised to govern from the center, and he's pledged to heal divisions. That's welcome rhetoric, certainly, but it's easier said than done. And in many ways, I think the kind of politics that we've experienced under Trump is symptomatic of deeper challenges that confront U.S. democracy. Trump hasn't helped that, but he's not the only cause. The ideological echo chamber of the 24-hour news cycle, the cultural divide that splits red and blue America, you know, the accusations among Republicans that Biden is intent on pulling America towards socialism, and the accusations among Democrats that Trump poses an existential threat to democratic culture. All of that doesn't just disappear in the blink of an election. So I think there are certainly deeper forces at work here that will make it hard for this new administration to heal wounds as they would like to.
Nizar, Joe Biden has pledged to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal if Iran returns to compliance. Can that actually happen? Or is there now just too much distrust because Donald Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal? And if it is possible, how difficult is it going to be?
It will be difficult, but I think that it is one of his objectives. Rouhani, the Iranian president, reacted already to the election of Biden, saying that it is an opportunity for the U.S. to go back on good on the positive track with Iran. So I think that this is an opportunity for both Iran and the U.S. to reassess their relations and aim at different future. This won't be easy, as you said in your question. It won't be easy, and but I think also that there are things that have been achieved with the Trump administration because of what was perceived among many foreign policy observers as too many concessions made by the Obama administration to Iran. So I think that, but I think that there is an opportunity for the U.S. and Iran to reestablish their relations and to have the big deal, the big negotiation, the big bargain between the U.S. and Iran taking place. That's something that can be possible under the Biden administration. It won't be an achievement in the first year. That's certainly not. It will certainly not be the case. But in over the next 3 to 4 years, I think that is a possibility because the demonization of Iran will cease, right? I think, and we will not have this front against Iran. So that's a possibility, I think, a serious possibility in the near future Biden administration.
Matthew, it looked to me like you were nodding to some of what Nizar was saying, so I wanted to ask if you wanted to jump in and add to what he was saying about that.
Yeah, I did want to. Thank you for the chance, Mohammed. I think it will be difficult for President Obama to achieve that objective of getting back into the JCPOA. And
President Biden, President-elect Biden.
President Biden. In part because under President Trump, politics have shifted a bit, and there is this a consensus for a hard line toward Iran and making Iran or including into the JCPOA framework Iran's support for militant groups in the Middle East and for an aggressive foreign policy that some would call, aligned with terrorism. And so that's a constraint. But also there are constraints in Iran. I mean, the Iranian people, but the Iranian political elite, maybe more decisively, feel that Rouhani was tricked by the United States, that he made all these concessions and got nothing for it because Trump just came in and tried to tear up the agreement, or at least pulled the U.S. out. So I think politically it's an uphill struggle in Iran as well. But eventually, just as we heard, I think that we'll see that alignment because there won't be such a confrontational and even rhetorically bombastic approach from Washington toward Iran that demonizes Iran. We won't see any more demonization. So, that obstacle will be removed.
Thomas, Donald Trump didn't just damage U.S. foreign policy around the world. I mean, he also essentially went to war against the foreign policy establishment inside his own government. So I'm curious, how does President-elect Biden begin to repair that? I mean, at a time when morale at the U.S. State Department is so low, what are the steps Biden can take to start repairing that?
Well, it's going to be difficult, certainly. I mean, the first thing that Joe Biden will do is get his own people in, those who he can trust, and he's going to have to speak out, essentially, to those in these federal institutions that his administration represents a change in course. What we saw from the last 4 years are not the future 4 years that Biden is going to pursue. I think that there's going to be a lot of reassurance from the new president, certainly that he wants to get off on the right track. So a lot of this is just kind of rhetorically trying to build bridges and repair some of this damaged fabric. But it's going to take a little bit of time in any case. And I don't think that we should expect all of these, healing of wounds to occur overnight.
Nizar, of course, we all know that one of the most crucial relationships for Donald Trump, his administration, was with Saudi Arabia. It's expected that Joe Biden would take a tougher line when it comes to Saudi Arabia. How should we expect the U.S.-Saudi relationship to change under the administration of President-elect Biden?
The President Biden Biden administration will seek all the time not to harm the relations with Saudi Arabia. Things will be tougher for Saudi Arabia. The U.S. will be watching them in terms of human rights, in terms of all the political rights, all the weapons purchasing by the Saudi Arabia and the UAE will be double-checked now, and the U.S. will be more regarded towards that. So all of this will change, but ultimately Saudi Arabia plays a crucial role in U.S. foreign policy in the region, and the U.S. will not be willing to harm that relationship. So there will be changes, but those changes will not lead us to see a rupture between Saudi Arabia and the U.S., will not lead us to see a U.S. far more confrontational with Saudi Arabia, so far from that. But there will be changes, and the very warm personal relations between Trump and the royal family will not be the same under a Biden administration. That we know that.
Matthew, what about America's relationship with Turkey? Where does that go now?
In the beginning, it's going to be a bit rough. President Trump and President Erdogan had a special personal bond, just like, as we just heard, Mohammed bin Salman and the royal family and President Trump did. President Trump has simply refused to implement sanctions against Turkey that he must under the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act because of Turkey's purchase of the Russian S-400 air defense system. Trump just hasn't done it. And so if you remove him from the picture, then that break on a deterioration in U.S.-Turkey relations is gone. And in Washington right now, I mean, it's hard to say this, but the brand Turkey is toxic. Turkey, I think, had only one significant friend in Washington, or at least the Turkish government, and that's Donald Trump. Vice President, now President-elect Biden, when he was candidate last December, he said some pretty shocking things about how President Erdogan needs to be removed, albeit through a democratic process. And candidate Biden has been very tough on Turkey for supposedly pushing Azerbaijan to be more aggressive in its war against Armenia. And then finally, Biden has been outspoken in criticizing Turkey for Turkey's actions looking for oil and gas in the Eastern Mediterranean. So in the beginning, things are going to be rough. But I think within, some period of time, because Biden is such a systematic strategic thinker, and I worked with him personally. I was in the State Department for 23 years. He's a systematic strategic thinker, and NATO is at the center of his calculus. So Turkey, with NATO's second largest military, is going to loom large. Finally, on Ukraine. I mean, you recall that under President Biden, he was the point person after Russia invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea. He was the point person on Ukraine. And Turkey and Ukraine just recently have signed a very important strategic cooperation agreement with regard to military technologies that is changing the whole dynamic of relations around the Black Sea, where Russia has been the aggressor over the course of the last decade and a half.
Thomas, you know, Joe Biden, of course, has a record of being able to reach across the aisle, being able to work in a bipartisan fashion alongside Republicans in the Senate in order to get legislation done. I mean, people who followed his record in the Senate, they know that. But it's still unclear which party will control the Senate. I mean, it's going to probably come down to these two Senate seat runoffs in Georgia come January, I believe. So how difficult is it going to be for Joe Biden if Republicans are once again in control of the Senate? Is he, through his sheer political skill, going to be able to win some of them over?
Well, he has spent decades in the Senate, and that's certainly to his advantage. He's going to try to build on these relationships that he has been erecting for that long time to try to make compromise. And I think that it is more likely that you could see President Biden getting together with Mitch McConnell and the Republicans on some issues. Some issues, though, I mean, certainly the Republicans are just going to take an obstructionist approach. But you could also think about some areas like infrastructure, for example, like dealing with increasing cost of prescription drugs, where you could see the two sides getting together. But it is going to be difficult. And the other aspect here is not just the negotiation that will unfold between Joe Biden and the Republicans, but also the negotiation that's going to unfold within the Democratic Party. You know, one of the things that I feel hasn't necessarily gotten as much attention in the lead up to the election is the real significant divides that split the Democratic Party on important policy issues between the progressives and the moderates. And so I think that those are going to reemerge. There are going to be certain progressives who want to pull Joe Biden further to the left to the extent that he can resist that. He said that he will. But there are lots of different factions at play, lots of different groups at play that he will have to appease. And that will just make the next 4 years from him very tricky.
Nizar, the U.S.-Israel relationship under the Obama administration was very tense. A lot of that was due to the Iran deal. Under the Trump administration, it was very cozy. People are now wondering what's going to happen next. We've seen that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has, in fact, congratulated Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But where do you see that relationship going now?
Certainly not. We certainly will not have as warm relations between the Biden administration and Israel as we used to have between Trump and Israel. But I don't see major and deep changes. Nothing similar to what happened under George Bush's administration, the first Bush, Bush the father. When there were threats to cut aid to Israel and things like that. We are not going to see that. Israel figures as a prominent ally in the understanding of world affairs of Joe Biden. In that famous article he wrote a few months ago in Foreign Affairs, Israel plays a role, a very important role in his vision and of what will happen in the world. And he repeated, even in that article, his unshakable support to the security and the safety of the state of Israel. So we shouldn't expect as warm relations, but Israel's security and Israel's safety and Israel's future will be protected by a Biden administration. And I think that all the progress that has been made in bringing several Arab states to establish relations with Israel will be pursued also by a Biden administration, because that's a breakthrough, and that's what many Israeli presidents, U.S. presidents tried to. Trump succeeded in that, and I think that that will be pursued.
All right, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all our guests, Nizar Massari, Thomas Gift, and Matthew Bryza. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.